Hi everyone, this is Chef Stephanie Michalak over at Turner Farm, and today we're just going to go over the technique of dry heat cooking sauté, which in French means to jump, and we're actually going to do some duck breast. So the first thing I did was I dried off my duck breast. I purchased that at a local grocer. But there are a bunch of different types of duck breasts out there, so you can absolutely go and either ask your butcher about them, or you can do a little bit of research and see for yourself. So what I've done is I've let it sit at room temperature for about 30 minutes, and what that does is bring the temperature of the meat a little bit up so that it's not stark cold when you throw it into a hot pan. I've also seasoned it with salt and pepper, and that's it. So what I'm going to do with the skin side of the duck breast, you can see that there's a pretty thick layer of skin on it. So I'm going to score it, and what that is cross-hatching. And I'm only cutting through the skin part of it, so I'm not cutting any part of the flesh. And what that does is it helps render the skin, so it's nice and crispy, and they don't have any flabby parts to it. I don't think anybody enjoys that part of any animal. So what I'm going to do is just make those slices. I'm trying to make sure that they're even, so I'm doing about a 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch stripe. And then what I'll do from there, you can see that I haven't cut through the actual meat part. I've only cut through the skin layer. And that's what you want. So from there, I'm just going to turn it to make a little crosshatch. And it's really pertinent that you have a very sharp knife to do this, so that you're not sawing on the duck. So now that I've got the cross-hatching done, I have a very hot pan. You can start to see that it's smoking a little bit, so I'm actually going to turn it down because you don't want your oil to smoke. And I've already put some oil in this already. You can see that the oil's moving around and kind of dancing a little bit, which is what you want, just because you know that it's extremely hot then. So I'm going to place my duck breast down. You can push it down a little bit so that it doesn't form a bubble in the center. This is also a really great technique for fish. So if you want really crispy skin on your fish, doing the crosshatch and sauteing it this way is the best way to do it. So I think this is the point where a lot of people freak out and they think they need to move their protein around in the pan. You don't. Just leave it be, and that's how you get that golden brown and delicious color. So I'm just going to let it sizzle away for a few minutes, and while that happens, I'm actually going to wash my hands. Anytime you're dealing with raw meat, you definitely want to make sure that you are being sanitary. So now we have the duck breast sauteing, and you'll see that I have a beautiful golden color on the skin, and that's exactly what you want. You don't want lots of burnt skin, and you don't want any parts to be pale. Essentially, if there's no color, there's minimal flavor. And what I've also done is I've thrown in a little bit of thyme, and that's just perfuming the dish a little bit so that the duck is accented with those oils. So at this point, gotten that lovely color on it. So I'm going to transfer it to a sheet tray with, some people call it a roasting rack. So we're going to put the duck on there, and what that does is if there's any fat rendering off of the skin, it'll drip onto the tray and it won't be underneath the duck. So I'm just going to stick it into a 350 Fahrenheit degree oven for about 10 minutes until the internal temperature is 135 degrees. And we're back. We've done a little bit of TV magic. Our duck breast has been cooking in a 350 degree oven until 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and what we've done now is just let it rest. And what that does is allows the temperature of the meat to raise a little bit more, because even though you're taking it out of the oven, the internal temperature is still going to be rising because it's still theoretically cooking. So we've let it rest a little bit, and you always want to make sure that you rest your meat before you go to slice it so that you don't have as much of a bloody running mess. So what I've done is I've switched out my cutting board. I'm using a slicing knife, and I've also switched out my tongs so that I'm not using the same tongs that I use on my raw duck as my cooked duck. And normally with this dish, what I do is I love to pair this with like roasted cauliflower or some whipped sweet potatoes or something like that, especially during the winter. But what I'm just showing you here is the duck breast and how I plate it, and I'm going to put a little bit of balsamic drizzle on it just for the aesthetic purposes. So I'm just putting it on my cutting board. I'm going to place that down, and what I'm going to do is slice it. You really want to make sure that your slices are against the grain of the meat so that it doesn't come out chewy. And what you also want to do is make sure that your slices are relatively even so that you get even bites. So what you want to do is just run your knife down in broad strokes so that you're not sawing into the meat. And it's also very pertinent that you have a very sharp slicing knife. If you don't have a slicing knife, it's absolutely fine. You can absolutely use a chef's knife as well. Just make sure that it's sharp. All right. So what I'm going to do is just transfer this over to a plate. And you can see that it's extremely moist. It's not dried out. I think a lot of people get confused with the whole dry heat cookery. It doesn't mean dry meat or any other vegetable, but it's using dry cooking methods to create a beautiful dish at the end of the day. So from here, what I'm going to do is just take some of my reduced balsamic and just drizzle it on the dish. That's it. Enjoy.